Hey everyone, hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the Inclusive Futures Lunchtime Learning Series on inclusive education. Today's webinar is going to explore research, evidence, and learning on preparing the school environment to welcome children with disabilities. So if that's what you're looking for, you're in the right place. It's going to be a 45-minute webinar today, so we're going to get cracking. We will have people continuing to join us, but we're going to start. So before I go too far into introducing our webinar and speakers, I'd like to take a moment to run through our accessibility provision. Today's webinar will be in English with simultaneous translations available in Bengali and Nepali. To choose your language channel in Zoom, click the interpretation button and then click on the language you would like to hear. To hear the interpreted language only, click Mute Original Audio. Closed captions are also available during the webinar. To view captions in Zoom, click the Closed Captions CC button and then select Show Subtitles. Finally, we also have international sign language that will be pinned to the screen throughout the webinar. Right now, it's below me. Please use the chat function to make any comments and type your questions for the speaker in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We will record the webinar and share it afterwards. All right, let's get started. My name is Claire Walsh, and I'm the Deputy Program Director of the Inclusive Futures Program, and I'm going to chair this webinar. Inclusive Futures is a UK government-funded program that implements projects which target persons with disabilities and aims to improve outcomes in education, health, livelihoods, and negative stereotyping and discrimination. We are a consortium of 10 organizations composed of INGOs, organizations of persons with disabilities, research institutes, and a social enterprise. When Inclusive Futures began in the fall of 2018, we brought together our partners. As I've said, organizations of persons with disabilities, INGO research partners, governments, and we ran a participatory process to understand their development priorities. Overwhelmingly, the OPDs and persons with disabilities who participated in that process pointed us to a focus on inclusive education, and we listened. From 2018 to 2025, we ran 8 inclusive education projects in 5 countries: Bangladesh, Kenya, Nepal, Nigeria, and Tanzania. As a program, we also work in health, livelihoods, and negative stereotyping and discrimination, but inclusive education has been a big focus of ours. Also, alongside our work in projects, a core mandate of Inclusive Futures is to generate research, evidence, and learning on our work and bring people together to discuss it. Due to the focus on inclusive education, we formed a consortium and partner learning network on inclusive education and co-created 3 learning products. So today, we're here to discuss one of those 3 learning products, preparing schools to welcome children with disabilities. On your screen, we can see that we have 4 panelists joining us today. One of that includes our guest speaker, Anna. We've decided to explore the topic of preparing schools to welcome children with disabilities by focusing on 3 learning points in the report. So now on your screen, you're going to see there was 7 key learning points in the report. But today we're going to ask our speakers to focus on working with the school community to build inclusive attitudes, securing leadership support for inclusion, and using data and evidence to meet inclusive learning needs. So thank you for taking the time to listen to our speakers and participate in this discussion. We're now going to kick off the discussion part of our webinar with our guest speaker, Anna Didio, who is the Chief Education Policy at UNESCO. She is going to speak on the Global Education Monitoring Report on Leadership in Education. Hi, Anna. I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Hi, Claire, and thanks a lot for having me here, and thanks a lot to all of you that are listening. So I'm really quickly giving you some insights on our report, and this report is the global report on leadership in education was launched in October 2024, but we have launched another report, a regional report that is focused on Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. And this report in February focused really on the intervention that Claire just mentioned. It was leadership for inclusion. And in fact, what the report argues that is completely and fully aligned with your messages is that inclusive school need school leaders who promote inclusion and articulate a vision that is based on inclusive values and attitudes, but also encourage individualized education plans, flexible curricula, and assessment that are adapted to learners' needs and follow a collaborative approach to promote inclusion and also targets teacher development to their school's unique needs. Based on this idea, the report came up with three main recommendations that you see here on your screen. I think it's very important just to pause 1 second and clarify that leadership in schools may have different objectives. The first report we published was Lead for Learning, but this is not the only and unique outcomes of schools. The outcome the outcome of inclusion is really something that is critical and fundamental. And to achieve this objective and really have leaders for inclusion, school leaders need to be trusted and empowered. And this is the first recommendation of the report. They need really to have opportunity to take decision and to there are talking about data and evidence, there are really studies that show that when they have this opportunity to take decision, their influence is greater. However, this autonomy is not sufficient if it's not accompanied by other measures. The second recommendation the report makes is that school leaders need to be recruited with inclusion in mind. What does this mean? It means that very often this doesn't happen. So even if countries apply competitive recruitment in schools, there is, first of all, very little experience on management of, especially of resources. And we know very well that management of financial and human resources is very important for children with disabilities. And in addition, selection processes only partially assess candidates' preparedness and their focus on inclusion. The third and final recommendation of the report is that school leaders need better training to promote inclusion. And this can be achieved in different ways, but one way that the report suggests is that we need to have standards and competency frameworks that frame what school leaders are expected to do with inclusion, how they are expected to articulate their vision, and how they are expected to be prepared and to empower the teachers that are working in schools. And we know that pre-service training, not just for a teacher and in service training, focusing on inclusion, is really something that is rarely developed. So I close here and I'm looking forward for the discussion. Thank you. You have here the QR code to download the report.
Great, Anna, thank you so much. Great to see a QR code for the report. Very interesting. I love the point about recruited with inclusion in mind. Something that's come up in our learning that's so critical is to understand what exists within the government systems to resource children with disabilities. So in Bangladesh, our program has been working with school level improvement plans, for example, to kind of access assisted devices for children with disabilities. So having those leaders who have that competency to do that is great. So thank you. Right, let me get back on my notes. We're now going to move to our panel. Anna very kindly is going to stick around for the Q&A. So if you have any questions for Anna, please use the Q&A box and we'll get to you at the end. Right, so we are now moving to our three panelists. And we're going to talk about these three topics: working with the school community to build inclusive attitudes, securing learning support for inclusion, and using data and evidence to meet inclusive learning needs. So first, I'm going to ask all our panelists to provide us with their general reflections on these areas of learning. And I would love to start with Anaïs. I'd love to start with you. Could you please introduce yourself and share your reflections on these learning points? Pick whichever one you'd like.
Thank you so much, Claire, and hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Anaïs, and I'm the Disability Inclusion Focal Point for the Global Education Cluster. What stood out to me specifically in the learning brief is the data-related action. This has been an area of focus for me at the GEC in the past 3 years. We know that there are many challenges around getting accurate data on children with disabilities in and out of school, their needs, the barriers, the risk they face, and that's true for all contexts, development and humanitarian crisis alike. We also know that stigma, discrimination play a huge part in keeping children with disabilities out of school, and therefore make it more challenging for us to collect accurate data on disability. The lack of knowledge around what signs to look out for among teaching and school staff to identify children with disabilities in their schools and classrooms is also an important challenge. So what do we do at the Global Education Cluster to support country teams to improve the availability and quality of data about children with disabilities and their access to quality education? So first, we recommend the use of the global estimates, 10 to 15% of children with disabilities among any group of children, if reliable prevalence data isn't available and when that's possible. We've also worked for the systematic inclusion of the Washington Group question short set into household level needs assessments in partnership with REACH. We have successfully included a set of disability-related barriers to education into our school-level needs assessment question banks. As the disability inclusion focal point for the Global Education Cluster, I'm always available to support country teams to review their monitoring tools and their templates to make sure that the monitoring of the education response that they carry out is also inclusive. That means that I recommend the systematic disaggregation of all monitoring indicators by gender, age, disability at the minimum, and I recommend the use of targeted indicators to monitor the response specifically from a disability angle, asking the question, how does this activity answer the specific identified needs of children with disabilities? Finally, and this is a key recommendation that's relevant for many areas of our work with country teams, we recommend working closely with national local partners who have access to information at community level, namely organizations of persons with disabilities or OPDs and NGOs working with children with disabilities, as well as community members and leaders. We know that humanitarian crises exacerbate the learning crisis and threaten to leave learners with disabilities even further behind. The lack of reliable data leads to more challenges in terms of aid delivery, which is critical in both emergency and development contexts. All humanitarian and development actors have a role to play in making schools more inclusive, and a key component of that is improving the quality and availability of the data. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Anaïs. I think really important point there is the disaggregation of data, but in addition, we need specific targeted indicators. And I think in our learning, we've found that specifically about stigma is that we don't measure stigma enough. We don't understand those contextual barriers. That's something that as a program, I would do differently next time. So that's a real take-home point for me. Right, I am moving on to Joy. Joy, could you please share with us your reflections and don't forget to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Claire. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Joy Shu'aibu, and I am the Country Director for Sightsavers in Nigeria. And I'd like to introduce myself as a disability inclusive advocate and activist. And it's a real pleasure to be here. So in response to my reflection on the learning report, the one that came through for me is how important it is for the inclusive education community to trust the leadership in trying to bring the children with disabilities to school. And I say this because in our interactions with parents of children with disability, some of them actually understand the need to provide education for their children. But because we're mainly looking at early education, where our own SMILE project in Nigeria focused on, it was understandable that parents were reluctant to bring their children to school because they were not very sure that their children will be taken care of. So the need to sensitize parents of children with disability and also ensure that the schools are well prepared to be a safe place for these children is very critical. Because you have the data, but if a parent is not confident that their child will be safe in school, they're not likely to utilize those services. So for me, I think programs on inclusive education need to focus on finding ways to ensure that the school leadership can be trusted with children that have disabilities. And the ways that we went about doing that in our program was to ensure that we had community dialogues. We had a situation where we had both the teachers and the parents in the same place so that the teachers and the school leadership could hear the fears and concerns of these parents and be able to provide the systems and structures in place in the school so that the children will feel safe. I think I'll stop here, Claire, in terms of my reflection. Thank you.
Thanks, Joy. Really great point to bring the parents into this discussion because they're so important as part of this conversation when we talk about inclusive education and bringing people together into one space to open up that dialogue on fears, stigma. Yes, this is such a huge step. Thank you. Right, Yumna, you're up next. I was just wondering, what sparked your interest when you were reading about the learning product, and I guess specifically talking about like leadership, data, community inclusion. Where did you focus on?
Thank you, Claire. Hi, everyone. This is Yumna Mmanga Omar, all the way from Zanzibar, Tanzania. I work in the Ministry of Education and Vocational Training, Zanzibar, as an inclusive education officer, but also as an OPD leader here in Zanzibar. And back to your question, I strongly believe that building inclusive attitudes within school communities is the most foundational steps towards real inclusion. Here in Tanzania, we have learned that even if we have the best policies, no matter how availability of infrastructure and assistive devices are there, if the school community still holds negative perceptions towards disability, then children with disability will always be excluded in the learning environment. That's why I always say inclusion starts with mindset and not in materials. But also, through this report that I've learned, I've come to read, I've seen that when schools actively engage different stakeholders like parents, teachers, students with or without disability, religious leaders, local leaders, and do awareness raising activities, attitudes begins to shift. It is a slow process, yes, but it's powerful. For example, using OPD leaders themselves, it's like bringing the lived experiences involving people with disability themselves in facilitating, in co-designing, it will help in reducing stigma and at all levels. From my experience as a young woman with disability, I've seen how damaging low expectations can be and how the involvement of live experiences can help in shifting attitudes of the people in inclusive education and other areas. Its impact when people lived experiences, including members of LPD, are involved. And my reflection of this step is simple. Inclusive attitudes don't require waiting for resources. They require commitment, collaboration, as well as community awareness, community ownership. And if schools work with every stakeholder, especially with OPD, they create not just inclusive classroom, but an inclusive culture. I think I should stop there.
Thanks so much. I like that that vibe of not waiting for the resources to come, starting with the mindset. I think that is great. Well, thank you everyone for providing your initial reflections. And just to remind everyone who's listening to us right now, if you do have a question, pop it in the Q&A box. We are going to move to a quick fire question round. So this is kind of your quick kind of first answers, first feelings on these questions. I'm going to start with Joy. What is one thing that you would do differently the next time you run an inclusive education project in Nigeria?
Thank you very much for that question, Claire. There are many things I would do differently, but the one thing I would do differently is to involve the parents of children with disability in the design phase of the project. Because we assumed what their needs would be. We focused, on the educational systems and ensuring that we were having the voices of persons with disability. But it was subsequently when we got onto the implementation phase that we realized that engaging with the parents of children with disability was essential. Because come to think of it, if we do everything right, we put the systems in place, the schools are accessible, the teachers are excited, they are trained, and then the children don't show up, what happens? So the voices of parents of children with disability is absolutely critical at the design phase of a project. And if I have the opportunity to do that again, I'll do that, Claire. Thank you.
So bringing that key stakeholder further into the project cycle management, starting at design. Great to hear that you had OPDs at the table at design, though. That is not always the case. Great. So Yumna, you're next on our quick fire. I was going to ask you, what do you think should be the #1 priority in Tanzania for inclusive education?
Thank you. For me, I specifically think that it's a matter of data and evidence. Right now, we have one of our biggest challenges, that is, we don't always have good and clear information about children with disabilities in schools. In many places, teachers don't know how to identify children with functional difficulties. and schools don't always record this data properly. This makes it hard for us to plan, support teachers, or know how well inclusion is working. So what I've learned today from the report is that data should not just be collected, it should be used. For example, using the data in the plan learning support, track attendance, make sure children feel included. I really like the example of using well-being tool to ask children and families how they feel about their school experiences. That kind of feedback is very, very helpful and something we should also apply. So in short, yes, we have learned from this. We need to build stronger systems to collect and use information in ways that really support learners with disability, not just count them. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure Anaïs is going to agree with you on that one because she had a really great point of being quite rigorous with the Washington group and the disaggregation and the separate indicators. But you also talked about local communities and OPDs and thinking about other sources of information. So need to kind of triangulate. I don't know if you want to speak on that point again, Anaïs, or if you want me to give you your quick fire question.
No, actually, I can take that. I wanted really to echo Joy's and Yumna's points here. I think it's really important to remember that when trying to collect data about children with disabilities, they themselves can tell you what their needs are. And a few ways that we do that in the humanitarian sector, and I'm sure can also be done in the development sector. For example, you could establish a target of 10% of children with disabilities in all the consultations that you organize with children. You could do separate focus group discussions with women and girls with disabilities to identify those gender-specific barriers, because intersectionality is also really critical when talking about disability inclusion. You want girls and women with disabilities to also feel included and take into account their specific needs and barriers and the risks they face. And you could also do safety and accessibility audits in schools, on school grounds, to identify solutions together with boys and girls with disabilities.
Yeah, it's always been my favorite fact, I think, about kind of infrastructure. It's like the best way to be kind of inclusive of the infrastructure that's not built yet. So you also have that kind of the buildings and doing the audits, but also kind of linking with the government to get their buy-in. So when they're building some new places, it can be inclusive from the start. Joy, I think you have a bit of experience working in Nigeria around that in eye health, not education, but did you want to come in to talk about your partnerships with government there?
Yes, and even on the inclusive education project, we had that kind of partnership, and it was one of the things that for us showed ownership of the project, because the school management board saw the need to do some physical restructuring of the schools to make sure that they were accessible for children with disabilities, and we thought that was great because the project scope did not really take that part of it into consideration, but we realized that there have been such a need. And in the wider disability community in Nigeria, we've been able to, together with the National Commission of Persons with Disability, which is an organ of the government that caters for persons with disability in Nigeria, been able to produce an accessibility building guideline that mandates for public places and institutions to be accessible, physically accessible for persons with disability. So yes, that is also an important component. And like Anaya has mentioned also, it's about safety, the safety of these children and doing the school assessments, because that was one of the things we also conducted in the schools to make sure that the schools were safe and accessible for children with disabilities.
Yeah, I
Thank you,
think
Claire.
we've had great experiences about how critical it is to work with kind of government. You know, if they're in Nigeria, it's more state government that's it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's like federated.
So, Beb?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, yes.
So we can
They
have
played
kind
a
of
significant role, yeah, in taking it
exactly,
forward. Yes.
exactly.
Mm.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all. That's the end of our discussion. I'm now going to welcome Anna back into the fold. And Anna, I'm going to give you a question that came through from our registration. We do read your questions when you put them in the registration form, so thank you for doing that. Anna, are there any challenges faced during the overall process of school integration? And if so, how are they managed, or how would you manage them?
Thanks a lot, Claire, and thanks for the person that put this question in in during the registration phase. It's very important. I think the panelists have touched on most of those because it's a question of stigma, stereotyping, low expectations first, and we know very well that even before COVID, almost 1 in 5 children with disabilities were excluded from schools, and they face complex barriers, and even those with a sensory, physical, intellectual disability are 2.5 times more likely to have never been in school than their peers, and without disability. And we know that when they are in school, eventually they face discrimination, biases, and these low expectations, they will not succeed, which are very important. So this is really the first thing. And to counter these behaviors, these low expectation, stigma, discrimination, many countries have moved away from this segregation and idea of educating student or pupil with disability in segregated settings, even if the word integration is not inclusion, is a different one. But many countries are moving in their legislation and policies towards a all means all definition. So everyone should be included, everyone should be taught in the same class with peers because benefits all. However, I don't know if you remember, but when we did the GEM report 2020 on inclusion in education, we checked what happens is laws and legislation, and we saw that even if 68% of countries had a definition of inclusive education, 26% address exclusively people with disabilities in their legislations, and 57% address multiple groups. And very often, even if we look at what happens with specifically with children with disability, we have seen that laws in 25% of countries still permit separate education settings for children with disabilities. And these shares are even larger in Asia, where this attains 40%, and in Latin America and Caribbean. The second point is lack of belief in the feasibility of inclusion. Also, this was touched by panelists, and this means that often policymakers and educators even doubt whether inclusion is worthwhile or even possible. And this is really very often related to the lack of training and preparedness of educators, teachers, ed teachers, people working in school, but also more generally, the lack of resources. And so we know very well that education serve multiple objectives, and efforts to pursue them at the same time may be conflicting. And this means that when schools are not prepared to teach and make pupils learn with disabilities in the same way as their peer without disability, the risk is backlash, misconception about inclusion, and this means that excluding children with disability in mainstream schools that are not prepared, supported, or accountable can intensify experience of exclusion and backlash against the system, making it even less inclusive. And so, and finally, there are two main issues that were also mentioned, the gaps in policy implementation. So these I just touched on it. The fact that this is still far to be, inclusion in education is far to be a reality in many countries. And also the issue of data, even if, of course, many governments are adopting the Washington Group UNICEF Child Functioning Module, but this is not something that happens for all countries. So there is also a lack of data. And as Anaïs said, there is also this importance of disaggregated data. And we know that since 2015, 41% of countries have lacked also a public available household survey to disaggregate education indicators. And Northern Africa and Western Asia show the lowest coverage in this sense. And finally, resource constraints and teacher preparedness and the fragmentation of approach. What the report said at the time was published, it proposes and recommended to have this horizontal and vertical collaboration, meaning involving in action and intervention many different actors, NGO, but also the families, the communities, and different sectors that are very important for early identification of disabilities, which is really fundamental to be able to answer to the needs of children with disabilities. And I stop here.
I can't even try to summarize all those points because they were so good. I was just wanted to say the statistics you started off with the children with disabilities out of school pre-COVID. Do we have statistics after COVID? Have things got worse? Do we know that for sure, or is that still an assumption we're having?
I don't have particular statistics. I think this needs to be asked to Anaïs. I think that there has been more countries that have been covered in this sense, but this again is just not a global one. It covers some countries. So, for example, I was looking at Papua New Guinea out-of-school rate for people with disabilities, 33%, and without disabilities, 13%. So there is a 20 percentage point gap between the two. And many countries may have the same situations. So that's an important, the lack of data, and even with this Washington UNICEF child functioning module and the fact that countries are going towards and adopting that, I think we are very far from a global idea of what's going on the out of school rate.
I wanted to pose this last question that's come through from our participants, because I don't think we've touched on this, and I thought Yumna might be a good person to ask. The question is, my question is regarding the involvement of teachers with disabilities. Have any of the panelists done any work on the experience of teachers with disabilities? Yumna, I think you are a teacher with disabilities. Am I correct? Would you like to speak on this question?
Yes, I do have experience. I taught for 2 to 3 years here in Zanzibar, and now I've shifted to the ministry. So there are teachers with disability. They themselves, they have disability, but also teachers who are assigned to students with disability. What we do in Zanzibar, we identify these teachers. When the employment are announced, we put consideration that those who have learned inclusive education should be highly encouraged to apply in the ministry for employment, because there are few. And as government, as the one of the governments. Pardon?
Oh, I just said that's great. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
One of the government's ways to increase the number of teachers in the inclusive education is that to encourage them to apply to study and to apply for the job opportunities, but also those teachers with disability to be given assistive devices once they are identified. Then the government tries to its level best to support them to make their teaching environment accessible. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I'm gonna be cheeky and see if I can fit in one last one from Joy. Joy, we have a question from someone in the chat that says, what are some of the strategies that we can use to ensure parent and community engagement go beyond advocacy? Do you have a quick couple points for us to round off our discussion here?
Yes. One of the things that we used in Nigeria and were successful with in terms of parent and community engagement was using the organizations of persons with disability and putting them in the forefront. So they served as a real life example of what a child can be if he's given a chance for education. So using organizations of persons with disability helps to create that trust, gives people a hope and that the dreams that they have for their children is actually possible. And they were able to engage not only with the parents, but also with the school management boards, with the government, and also with the school teachers. And they provided guidance because they also had their own experiences to share about how they came through the educational system, the challenges that they faced, and some mitigations that could be used to improve learning for children with disabilities. So ensuring that organizations of persons with disability are involved in the forefront of engagement, whether it's community or with the government, is absolutely critical and important.
Great note to end on, Joy. The meaningful engagements of organizations with persons with disabilities. I think that is a great note to end on, is critical for inclusive education. Right. A big thanks to my panelists and guest speaker today, Anaïs, Yumna, Joy, Anna. Thanks for making the time, your flexibility, your insights. It's been a great 45 minutes. My appreciation to our interpreters and also to the behind the scenes people for webinars. It is quite tricky to run, so thank you very much. And of course, to everyone who took time out of the day to participate in the discussion. We will get to your questions if we didn't get to them in this session. So thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Learn more www.inclusive-futures.org/including-children-with-disabilities-at-school